Footsteps echoed violently against the cold concrete floor. Outside, sirens blared relentlessly, casting aggressive red and blue flashes across the brick walls. In the harsh glare of the interrogation room, a young boy sat handcuffed to a chair, tears streaming down his bruised cheeks. Two arrogant police officers stood over him, laughing with cruel satisfaction, convinced they had caught just another street thug. They had stripped away his dignity, dismissing his desperate pleas for a phone call with sneers and indifference. Little did those uniformed bullies know that karma was about to arrive wearing a heavy black robe. The heavy oak doors swung open with commanding force. Laughter died instantly. Silence choked every breath in the room. Power had entered, and those ignorant badges were about to lose everything. Darius Bennett had only been trying to get home. He was an honor student at Crestview High, maintaining a 3.9 GPA and serving as the starting point guard for the varsity basketball team. His backpack weighed heavily on his shoulders, filled with an AP Physics textbook, a graphing calculator, and a half-finished essay on the French Revolution. The evening air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of approaching rain. He had stayed late after practice to help his coach organize the equipment room, a small favor that meant he was walking back to his affluent suburban neighborhood of Cedar Creek well after dusk. Cedar Creek was a quiet, manicured enclave where lawns were perfectly trimmed, driveways held expensive imported cars, and streetlights cast a warm, safe glow over the sidewalks. Darius belonged there. He had lived in the corner house on Maplewood Drive since he was a child. Yet, as a young black teenager in a predominantly white neighborhood, he had learned early on that his presence sometimes triggered invisible alarms in the minds of strangers who did not know him. He stopped at a local convenience store, a small mom-and-pop shop owned by Mr. Clarence Finch, to grab a sports drink and a pack of gum. He paid, offered Mr. Finch a polite nod, and stepped back out into the cool night air. He popped a piece of peppermint gum into his mouth and adjusted his headphones, letting the smooth rhythm of 90s hip-hop drown out the silence of the streets. 2 blocks from his front door, the atmosphere shifted. A police cruiser had been stealthily prowling the neighborhood with its headlights dimmed. Suddenly, it accelerated. The aggressive roar of the engine pierced through Darius's music. Before he could turn his head to assess the situation, the cruiser swerved sharply, jumping the curb and cutting off his path on the sidewalk. The blinding glare of the spotlight hit him instantly, washing out his vision and leaving him completely disoriented. Hands out of your pockets. Do it now. A voice barked over the cruiser's PA system. Darius froze, his heart slamming against his ribs like a trapped bird. He pulled his headphones down around his neck, blinking against the intense light. I just have my phone, he stammered, raising his empty hands into the air to show he was not a threat. The driver's side door flew open, and Officer Warren Kessler stepped out. Kessler was a veteran of the force, a man whose thick neck and aggressive posture spoke volumes about his heavy-handed policing style. He had a reputation in the precinct for being rough, a trait he masked under the guise of being tough on crime. From the passenger side emerged his partner, Officer Blaine Tucker, a younger man trying hard to emulate Kessler's authoritative swagger. I said, "Keep your hands where I can see them, boy," Kessler shouted, his hand resting menacingly on the butt of his service weapon. He closed the distance in 3 long strides, grabbing Darius violently by the shoulder and spinning him around. "Hey, what are you doing?" Darius cried out, his voice cracking with a mixture of terror and adolescent indignation. "I live right down the street. I'm just walking home." "Shut your mouth," Tucker sneered, stepping in to grab Darius's other arm. With unnecessary force, they slammed the teenager face first against the cold, hard metal of the cruiser's hood. The impact knocked the wind out of Darius, his cheek pressing painfully against the damp surface. "Stop resisting," Kessler yelled. Even though Darius wasn't moving a muscle, it was a practiced phrase, shouted loud enough for any potential witnesses to hear, painting a false narrative of the encounter. "I'm not resisting," Darius gasped, struggling to draw breath. "My ID is in my backpack. My name is Darius Bennett. My house is literally 2 blocks away." Kessler laughed, a harsh, grating sound. He yanked Darius's arms behind his back, twisting his wrist until Darius let out a sharp cry of pain. Yeah, sure it is. And I'm the King of England. We got a call about a prowler in the area matching your exact description. Blackmail, dark clothing, suspicious behavior. Darius was wearing his school's varsity jacket, bright blue and gold with a massive C for Crestview stitched on the front. I'm wearing a Letterman jacket, Darius protested, hot tears of frustration pricking the corners of his eyes. I'm coming from basketball practice. Please, just check my ID. Call my dad. We'll do the talking. Tucker interrupted, roughly patting down Darius's pockets, pulling out his phone, his wallet, and the pack of gum. He tossed them onto the hood of the car. Tucker then grabbed Darius's backpack, unzipping it and carelessly dumping its contents onto the sidewalk. The heavy AP Physics textbook hit the concrete with a loud thud, followed by his calculator and neatly organized folders. Look at this, Warren, Tucker mocked, kicking the textbook with his heavy boot. Kid's a real scholar. Probably stole the bag from one of the rich kids up the hill. Please, Darius begged, the reality of his powerlessness setting in. The cold metal of the handcuffs bit sharply into his wrists, clicking tight to tight. It sent a shooting pain up his forearms. You're making a mistake. My father. I don't care if your father is the president, Kessler hissed, leaning in close so Darius could smell the stale coffee and tobacco on his breath. You don't dictate the terms here. You're a suspect in an attempted burglary. You're going downtown. They grabbed him by the collar of his expensive varsity jacket and shoved him roughly into the back of the cruiser. The plastic seat was hard and uncomfortable. The door slammed shut, trapping him in a dark, claustrophobic cage of wire and reinforced glass. Darius leaned his head against the window, watching his school books and carefully written essay blow across the sidewalk in the wind. As the cruiser pulled away, he closed his eyes, a single tear escaping. He was terrified, but beneath that terror, a profound sense of injustice began to ignite. He knew something they did not. He knew exactly who his father was. The ride to the 4th District Precinct was a silent nightmare. The officers in the front seat occasionally murmured to each other, laughing at private jokes, completely disregarding the traumatized teenager in the back. For Darius, every turn of the car felt like a step further away from safety. He focused on his breathing, repeating his father's advice in his head. Stay calm. Assert your rights respectfully. Do not let them provoke you. The precinct was a stark contrast to the quiet wealth of Cedar Creek. It was a decaying concrete structure in the center of the city, reeking of floor wax, stale sweat, and cheap institutional coffee. As Kessler and Tucker hauled him through the double doors, Darius felt the heavy stares of other officers and weary civilians. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly yellow hue over the chaotic room. Desk Sergeant Diego Morales barely looked up from his paperwork as they marched Darius to the booking counter. Morales was a man completely desensitized to his environment, treating human beings like inventory numbers. What do we have here, Kessler? Morales asked, his voice bored, chewing on a matchstick. Caught a prowler up in the estates, Kessler announced loudly, puffing out his chest. Matches the description of the string of break-ins on Elm Street. Tried to give us some lip about living up there. Morales finally glanced up, his eyes sweeping over Darius's bruised face, his torn varsity jacket, and the heavy chains around his wrists. Name, Darius Bennett, Darius said, his voice remarkably steady despite the trembling of his hands. I am a minor. I demand my right to make a phone call to my parents immediately. You are holding me illegally, Tucker scoffed, slapping the back of Darius's head lightly, a demeaning, disrespectful gesture. Listen to him using the big words. You've been watching too much television. Kid, put him in room 3, Kessler instructed, ignoring Darius's request entirely. Let him sweat for a bit. I want to see if we can get a confession for the Elm Street jobs before we process him. They drag him down a narrow, windowless hallway. The walls were painted a depressing institutional gray, scuffed with the marks of countless struggles. They shoved him into Interrogation Room 3, a small, suffocating box containing nothing but a bolted-down metal table and 3 hard chairs. The door slammed shut with a heavy metallic clang that echoed in Darius's chest. The deadbolt slid into place. Time stretched. Darius sat there shivering slightly in the over-air-conditioned room. His wrists were throbbing, the metal cutting into his skin. He felt a deep hollow ache in his stomach. He was not just a suspect. To them, he was a statistic, a stereotype they had projected onto him the moment they saw his skin color in that neighborhood. Some time passed before the door opened again. Kessler and Tucker walked in carrying steaming cups of coffee. They did not offer him any water. They did not remove the handcuffs. Kessler paused, a slight frown creasing his forehead. He looked back at Tucker, who just shrugged. The name did not register. To them, Harlan Bennett was just another name. Good for Harlan, Kessler sneered. Is he going to come down here and bail you out with his landscaping money? Darius felt a cold, hard knot of resolve tighten in his chest. Let me call him. Give me my phone and let me call him right now. Something in the boy's unwavering gaze made Kessler hesitate. He was used to suspects breaking, crying, or shouting. Darius was unnervingly calm now, possessing a quiet authority that felt entirely out of place in a frightened teenager. Kessler, running a hand over his face, finally relented. Fine, he barked. He reached into his pocket and pulled out Darius's cell phone, slamming it onto the table. You get to make the call. Make it count, because after this, you are going into holding. Darius awkwardly maneuvered his handcuffed hands to pick up the device. He unlocked it with a bloody thumbprint and dialed the number he knew by heart. It rang twice. Darius. The voice on the other end was deep, resonant, and commanded immediate respect. Dad, Darius said, his voice finally breaking, the emotional dam cracking now that he heard his father's voice. Dad, I need help. Where are you? Are you hurt? The tone shifted instantly from warm to razor sharp. I am at the 4th District Precinct. To officers, they arrested me walking home. They slammed me against the car. Dad, my wrists are bleeding. They will not take the cuffs off. There was a profound, chilling silence on the other end of the line. It was not the silence of confusion. It was the silence of a hurricane gathering its strength. Who are the officers? Harlan asked, his voice deathly quiet. Darius squinted, reading the silver nameplates on their chests. Officer W. Kessler and Officer B. Tucker. I am on my way, Judge Harlan Bennett said. The line went dead. Darius set the phone down. Kessler smirked, taking a sip of his coffee. Daddy on his way. Good, we will have a nice long chat with him about how he raised a criminal. Darius looked at Kessler, a strange mixture of pity and anticipation in his eyes. You really should not have done this. Harlan Bennett was not a landscaper. He was the Honorable Harlan Bennett, the Chief Judge of the State District Court. He was a man who had built his career tearing down corrupt systems and holding the powerful accountable. He was known in legal circles as a brilliant jurist, a man of unyielding integrity, and someone possessing a terrifyingly calm demeanor when angered. When Darius's call came through, Harlan was in his chambers at the downtown courthouse. He had just finished presiding over a grueling late-night emergency injunction hearing regarding a high-stakes corporate fraud case. He was physically exhausted, rubbing his temples, preparing to change into his street clothes and head home. Then the phone rang. Listening to his son's trembling voice, hearing the words "slam me against the car and wrists are bleeding," Harlan felt a primal, visceral rage ignite within his soul. He did not waste a single second changing his clothes. He did not grab his briefcase. He simply stood up, the heavy black silk of his judicial robe swirling around his ankles, and walked out of his chambers. He bypassed his security detail, marching directly to his car in the underground garage. He drove to the 4th District Precinct with a singular, terrifying focus. Back at the precinct, Officers Kessler and Tucker had left Darius in the interrogation room to sweat. They were standing near the front desk drinking coffee and laughing with Sergeant Morales and a young rookie named Officer Tyler Grant. I'm telling you, the kid thought he was a lawyer. Tucker laughed, leaning against the counter, talking about illegal detainment and his rights. They learn a few buzzwords on the internet and think they own the place. Just process him. Let him sit in a cell overnight. Teach him a lesson about respect. Did you get a hold of the parents? Kid called his dad, Kessler said, checking his watch. Some guy named Harlan, probably driving down here in a beat-up Civic to yell at us. I love it when the parents show up. I will threaten to arrest the dad for obstructing justice if he gives me lip. The heavy reinforced oak double doors of the precinct did not just open. They were thrust apart with violent authority. They slammed against the interior walls with a deafening crack that made every officer in the room physically jump. The laughter died instantly. Conversations halted mid-sentence. The atmosphere in the room plummeted. Standing in the doorway was a tall, imposing figure. He was not wearing a t-shirt. He was not wearing a suit. He was draped in the commanding, flowing black robe of a chief district judge. The overhead fluorescent lights seemed to catch the anger radiating from him. His face was a mask of cold, concentrated fury. Every veteran officer in the room froze. Their blood ran cold. Sergeant Morales's jaw dropped, and his matchstick fell from his lips onto the keyboard. He scrambled to his feet, knocking his chair backward. He knew exactly who was standing in his precinct. Every cop in the city knew Judge Bennett. He was the judge who signed their warrants. He was the judge who mercilessly dismantled sloppy police work on the stand. He was the judge who had recently sentenced 3 corrupt vice detectives to federal prison. Your Honor, Morales stammered, his voice trembling, his hands instinctively dropping to his sides in a posture of complete submission. Kessler and Tucker turned around, their smug smiles slowly melting into expressions of profound confusion. They did not recognize him immediately, but the black robe and the sheer aura of power emanating from the man made their police instincts scream that something was terribly wrong. Judge Harlan Bennett did not acknowledge Morales. He did not look at the rookie. His eyes, burning with a quiet, lethal intensity, swept the room and locked onto the 2 officers standing near the desk. He took a step forward, the heavy fabric of his robe rustling menacingly in the dead silence of the room. Which one of you? Harlan began, his voice not raised, yet echoing off the concrete walls like thunder. Is Officer Kessler, and which one is Officer Tucker? Tucker swallowed hard, glancing nervously at Kessler. Kessler, trying to maintain his tough guy facade despite the sinking feeling in his gut, puffed his chest out slightly. I am Kessler. That is Tucker. Who wants to know? Morales looked like he was about to faint. Kessler, shut your mouth, he hissed frantically. That is Judge Bennett. The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Judge Bennett. The color drained entirely from Warren Kessler's face. The arrogance evaporated, replaced by a sudden, sickening terror. He looked from the black robe to the furious eyes, and suddenly the pieces snapped together with bone-crushing clarity. Darius Bennett. I am Harlan Bennett, the judge stated, his voice dropping an octave, carrying the weight of a death sentence. He closed the distance between them, stopping mere inches from Kessler. Kessler, despite being a large man, seemed to shrink under the immense pressure of the judge's presence. And you, Harlan said, pointing a finger that felt like a loaded weapon directly at Kessler's chest. Have my son chained to a table in a back room. Your Honor. Tucker started, stepping backward, his hands raised defensively. We received a call, a suspect matching his description. Do not insult my intelligence with your fabricated probable cause. Harlan snapped, his voice sharp as a razor. My son is an honor student who was walking home in his own neighborhood. You assaulted him. You illegally detained him, and you denied him his right to counsel. Harlan turned his piercing gaze to Sergeant Morales, who was sweating profusely. Sergeant, you have exactly 30 seconds to produce my son. If he is not standing in front of me, unrestrained, by the time I finish counting, I will have the FBI field office down here. I will personally see to it that this precinct is under federal investigation, and I will strip every single one of you of your badges before the sun comes up. Get the keys. Morales screamed at Tucker, completely losing his composure. Get the damn keys right now. Get the boy. Tucker practically tripped over his own feet, sprinting down the hallway toward Interrogation Room 3, his hands shaking violently as he fumbled for his key ring. Kessler remained frozen, trapped under the paralyzing stare of Judge Bennett. He had spent his entire career bullying those he deemed powerless. For the first time in his life, he was staring into the face of absolute power, and he knew with terrifying certainty that his career was already over. "Your Honor, please understand," Kessler tried to whisper, his voice cracking, the tough guy persona shattered into a million pieces. "It was a misunderstanding. It is dark out there. Harlan leaned in closer, his voice a dangerous, quiet rumble. "You did not make a mistake, Officer Kessler. You made a choice. You looked at my son and you saw prey. But you chose the wrong boy, and I am going to make an example out of you that this department will never, ever forget." Footsteps echoed rapidly down the hall. Tucker emerged looking pale and sick to his stomach, followed by Darius. Darius was rubbing his wrist, the skin raw and bleeding where the cuffs had dug in. He looked exhausted, but seeing his father standing there in his full judicial regalia, commanding the room like a king holding court, a small, weary smile touched his lips. Harlan's severe expression instantly softened. He rushed past the terrified officers, enveloping his son in a tight embrace, uncaring of the dirt and blood getting on his silk robe. "I've got you, Darius. You are safe now," Harlan whispered fiercely into his son's ear. He pulled back, inspecting the raw, bleeding skin on Darius's wrist. The sight of the injuries erased any lingering trace of mercy Harlan might have possessed. He turned slowly back to face the room. The officers took a collective step back. The judge did not yell. He did not curse. He simply looked at Kessler and Tucker with a gaze so cold it could freeze boiling water. "Oh, Morales," Harlan said, his voice deadly calm. "Yes, Your Honor," Morales squeaked. "I want the badge numbers of these two men. I want the dash cam footage from their cruiser. The body cam footage, which I pray to God they did not accidentally turn off, and I want the full precinct security logs impounded immediately. You will place them both on administrative leave without pay." Effective this exact second, Kessler opened his mouth to protest, but a single lethal glare from Harlan shut him up instantly. "This is not over," Harlan promised, his voice echoing in the silent precinct. "This is just the arraignment. The trial is going to destroy you." He wrapped his arm protectively around his son's shoulders and guided him toward the heavy oak doors, leaving behind a room of grown men paralyzed by the devastating consequences of their own ignorance. The door swung shut behind them, sealing the officers inside the tomb of their ruined careers. The ride back to the affluent enclave of Cedar Creek was enveloped in a heavy, suffocating silence. Darius sat in the passenger seat of his father's sedan, staring blankly at the passing street lights. The adrenaline had finally drained from his system, leaving behind a profound aching exhaustion and a terrifying vulnerability. He looked down at his wrists, now wrapped in white gauze from the first aid kit his father kept in the trunk. The physical pain was sharp, but the psychological wound the sudden, violent realization that his neighborhood, his achievements, and his innocence offered zero protection against a badge and bias cut infinitely deeper. Harlan Bennett drove with both hands, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were bone white. His face was carved from granite. He was not just a father comforting his traumatized son. He was a master tactician surveying a battlefield. By the time he pulled into their driveway, the blueprint for absolute destruction had already been drafted in his mind. "Go inside. Take a hot shower. Try to sleep," Harlan said, his voice uncharacteristically gentle as he turned off the ignition. "Your mother is waiting for you." "What are you going to do, Dad?" Darius asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Harlan looked at his son, his eyes dark and resolute. "I am going to do my job, Darius. I am going to ensure those men never wear a uniform again." The moment Harlan walked into his home office, the judge vanished, and the executioner took over. He bypassed the local precinct entirely, knowing the blue wall of silence would immediately begin laying bricks to protect Kessler and Tucker. Instead, Harlan picked up his encrypted phone and dialed a number he had not used in years, the personal cell phone of Agent Sofia Ramirez, the special agent in charge of the FBI Civil Rights Division for the district. Soon, the wheels of a federal investigation were already turning silently in the dark. The pushback began exactly as Harlan had anticipated. His office phone rang. It was Captain Royce Mercer, the precinct commander of the 4th District. Judge Bennett. Harlan, listen. I wanted to reach out personally. Mercer began, his tone dripping with forced camaraderie and desperate damage control. What happened last night was a colossal misunderstanding. My guys were on edge. We have had a rash of burglaries. Captain Mercer. Harlan interrupted, his voice slicing through the phone line like a scalpel. Are you calling to inform me that Officers Kessler and Tucker have been terminated? Well, now, Harlan, you know there is a process. The police union, then you and I have nothing to discuss, Harlan stated coldly. Do not contact my office or my family again unless it is through your legal counsel. Oh, and Captain, I expect the dash cam and body cam footage on my desk by noon. Harlan hung up. He knew what was coming next. A courier delivered a manila envelope from the precinct. Inside was a sworn affidavit signed by the precinct's IT director stating that due to a corrupted hard drive sector, the dashcam footage from Kessler's cruiser had been irretrievably lost, and both officers had allegedly experienced battery failures with their body cameras during the time of the arrest. It was the oldest, dirtiest trick in the book. It was an insult to Harlan's intelligence. When Harlan brought the news home that evening, Darius was sitting at the kitchen table icing his swollen cheek. The teenager listened to the blatant lie about the cameras, a bitter smile crossing his face. They think they are smart, Darius said, shaking his head. He pulled his laptop toward him and opened a map of his walking route from the night before. Dad, they stopped me on the corner of Elm and Maplewood. Right. Yes. Harlan nodded, leaning over his son's shoulder. Look who lives on that corner. Darius pointed to a massive gated property on the map. Mr. Dominic Caldwell, the CEO of Sentinel Tech. His entire property perimeter is rigged with 4K resolution night vision security cameras. He sponsors my basketball team. I guarantee you his cameras cover the sidewalk all the way down the block. Harlan felt a cold, predatory smile spread across his face. The officers thought they had controlled the narrative by wiping their own devices. They had completely forgotten the neighborhood they were terrorizing. 30 minutes later, Harlan was sitting in Mr. Dominic Caldwell's expansive home theater room. The tech billionaire, appalled by the story, had his security team pull the archived footage. There it was in stark, unforgiving, high-definition black and white. The video showed Darius walking peacefully. It showed the cruiser violently jumping the curb, the blinding spotlight, Kessler throwing Darius against the hood unprovoked, the illegal search, the dumping of the backpack, and the painful, aggressive handcuffing. There was no resisting. There was no prowling. It was a textbook, undeniable case of assault under the color of law. Harlan asked for a copy on an encrypted drive. He did not take it to the press. He did not take it to the local district attorney. He drove it straight to the FBI field office and handed it to Agent Sophia Ramirez. Seal the exit. Sophia, Harlan told her as she watched the footage, her face tightening in disgust. I do not just want their badges. I want their freedom. The atmosphere in the city soon crackled with invisible tension. Word had leaked through the courthouse grapevine that Judge Bennett was on a warpath against the 4th District, though the specifics remained shrouded. The Police Benevolent Association, sensing a catastrophic PR disaster, decided to strike first. They hired attorney Dean Hollister, a slick, aggressive defense attorney known for getting dirty cops acquitted by dragging victims through the mud. Hollister immediately called a press conference on the steps of the precinct. My clients, Officers Warren Kessler and Blaine Tucker, are decorated public servants who put their lives on the line daily. Hollister boomed into the microphones, his face a mask of manufactured outrage. They are currently the victims of a political witch hunt orchestrated by a powerful judge abusing his authority to protect his son. We have reason to believe the minor in question was involved in illicit activities, and we demand an independent investigation into Judge Bennett's blatant conflict of interest and obstruction of justice. It was a gross, calculated smear campaign. They were trying to paint Darius, a thug, and Harlan as corrupt, relying on the public's inherent bias to carry the lead. Watching the broadcast in his chambers, Harlan remained perfectly still, His clerks expected him to throw a chair or call his own press conference. Instead, Harlan simply picked up his pen and signed a massive 70-page federal civil rights lawsuit against the city, the police department, and the individual officers. Concurrently, the Department of Justice, armed with the Caldwell footage, quietly convened a grand jury while Kessler strutted around the precinct, treating his administrative leave like a paid vacation and boasting about how his union lawyer was going to destroy the arrogant judge. Officer Blaine Tucker was rapidly unraveling. Tucker was younger, he had a mortgage he could not afford, a newborn baby, and a fragile marriage that was buckling under the intense public scrutiny. Unlike Kessler, who was a true believer in his own untouchability, Tucker knew exactly who Harlan Bennett was, and the sheer terror of federal prison was keeping him awake at night. Vomiting into his bathroom sink. The turning point came when Agent Sofia Ramirez from the FBI accidentally bumped into Tucker at a grocery store far outside his jurisdiction. She did not threaten him. She simply handed him a plain envelope. Inside were high-resolution stills from the Caldwell security camera. It showed Tucker clearly kicking Darius's school books. It showed him participating in the illegal search. But the final piece of paper was the most devastating. It was a draft of a federal indictment for deprivation of rights under color of law, carrying a potential sentence of 10 years in a federal penitentiary. His name was right at the top alongside Kessler. Asterisk. "The train is leaving the station, Blaine," Agent Ramirez whispered, standing by the produce section. "Kessler is going to use you as a human shield. Hollister works for the union, not you. If you want to see your daughter grow up outside of a visitation room, you need to be in my office tomorrow. We want the rot, all of it." The blue wall of silence is impenetrable until self-preservation kicks in. Then it crumbles like dry sand. The next day, Blaine Tucker walked into the FBI field office, his face pale, his hands shaking. He sat down with federal prosecutors and spilled everything. He did not just talk about Darius's arrest. To save his own skin, Tucker opened Pandora's box. He detailed a horrific history of Warren Kessler's abuses. He testified about Kessler routinely targeting minorities in affluent neighborhoods. He testified about illegal searches, fabricated probable cause, and the systemic falsification of police reports. But the final nail in the coffin, the twist that elevated the case from a single civil rights violation to a massive federal racketeering charge, was Tucker's confession about the drop gear. "Kessler has a false bottom in his secondary locker at the precinct," Tucker confessed, his voice breaking, wiping tears from his eyes. "He keeps unregistered firearms, bags of narcotics, and stolen jewelry in there. When he needs to justify a bad stop, or when someone fights back, he plants it. He told me to find something in the Bennett kid's backpack. When I did not, he was furious. He was planning to plant a bag of meth on the kid if the judge had not shown up." When Harlan received the call from Agent Sofia Ramirez detailing Tucker's confession, a cold shiver ran down his spine. His intervention had not just saved his son from an unjust arrest. He had literally saved Darius from being framed for a felony that would have destroyed his entire future. The fury Harlan felt was no longer just a burning fire. It was a cold absolute zero. The hammer was ready to fall. It happened one day. The 4th District Precinct was operating as usual, the air thick with the smell of old coffee and cynical humor. Warren Kessler was standing by the sergeant's desk in plain clothes, laughing loudly about a golf game he had played while on paid leave. He was convinced the storm had blown over, that the union had successfully intimidated the judge into backing down. Then the heavy oak doors of the precinct opened. This time it was not a solitary judge in a black robe. It was 24 federal agents wearing dark windbreakers with large yellow FBI letters stamped across their backs. They moved with terrifying synchronized efficiency. The chatter in the precinct died instantly, replaced by the heavy thud of tactical boots. Federal warrant. "Nobody move. Hands away from your keyboards." The lead agent barked. Kessler dropped his coffee cup. It shattered on the linoleum, the brown liquid pooling around his expensive shoes. He watched in absolute paralyzed horror as 4 armed federal agents marched directly toward him. Warren Kessler, An agent said, his voice void of any emotion. "You are under arrest for federal civil rights violations, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice." "What? You cannot do this. I am a cop. Call Hollister," Kessler screamed. The tough guy facade finally shattering, replaced by the panicked screech of a cornered animal. They did not listen. They spun him around, and for the first time in his adult life, Warren Kessler felt the cold, unforgiving bite of steel handcuffs clamping tightly around his own wrists. The agents pulled his arms up sharply, forcing him to bend forward slightly, the exact same maneuver he had used on countless innocent people, including Darius. Simultaneously, a separate team of agents marched straight into the locker room. They bypassed the standard locks, brought in a breaching tool, and ripped the metal door of Kessler's secondary locker off its hinges. They found the false bottom exactly where Tucker had said it would be. As agents pulled out unregistered throw-down weapons and baggies of crystallized narcotics, sealing them in evidence bags, the remaining officers in the precinct watched their careers flash before their eyes. The corruption was out in the open, undeniable, and utterly damning. The federal courthouse was packed to maximum capacity. The air was thick with anticipation. Harlan Bennett was not on the bench today. He was sitting in the front row of the gallery, shoulder to shoulder with Darius. Darius looked sharp in a tailored charcoal suit, his head held high, his wounds healed, but his spirit permanently altered, hardened by the reality of the world. At the defense table sat Warren Kessler. He was unrecognizable. The swagger was gone. He looked years older, his skin sallow, his eyes darting nervously around the room. He was wearing a drab, ill-fitting prison jumpsuit, having been denied bail due to his attempts to intimidate witnesses prior to the trial. His union lawyer, Attorney Dean Hollister, sat beside him, looking defeated. The mountain of evidence, combined with Tucker's devastating testimony, made the case utterly unwinnable. The federal judge presiding over the case, an old colleague of Harlan's known for his lack of mercy toward corrupt officials, glared down from the bench. "Warren Kessler," the presiding judge's voice echoed through the cavernous room, "you were entrusted with a badge, a gun, and the sacred duty to protect the public. Instead, you used that power to terrorize, to frame, and to brutalize those you deemed vulnerable. You infected the justice system with a rot so deep it is a miracle a young man like Darius Bennett survived your encounter with his future intact." Kessler kept his head down, staring at the scarred wooden table, his hands trembling. "The evidence presented here, particularly the terrifying reality of your drop gear, shows you are not a rogue cop. You are a criminal masquerading as a public servant," the judge continued. "Therefore, on the counts of deprivation of civil rights, conspiracy to commit evidence tampering, and federal racketeering, I sentence you to 22 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary without the possibility of parole." A collective gasp swept through the gallery. 22 years for a former cop. It was effectively a death sentence. The reality of his absolute destruction crashed down on Kessler. His knees buckled, and he let out a pathetic, gut-wrenching sob, collapsing into his chair before the federal marshals yanked him roughly to his feet. As the marshals dragged Kessler down the center aisle, his eyes desperately scanned the crowd until they locked onto Harlan and Darius. Harlan did not smile. He did not gloat. He looked at the ruined man with the cold, detached satisfaction of a surgeon who had successfully excised a tumor. Darius, however, held Kessler's gaze directly. The teenager who had been crying on the hood of a police car was gone. In his place was a young man who had learned the true mechanics of power and justice. Blaine Tucker, having accepted a plea deal for his cooperation, was sentenced 2 years in a minimum security facility and permanently stripped of his right to work in law enforcement or security anywhere in the United States. The 4th District Precinct was placed under federal monitorship, leading to the forced resignation of Captain Royce Mercer and the dismissal of a dozen other officers implicated in Kessler's web of corruption. Karma had not merely visited Warren Kessler, it had kicked down his door, dragged him into the street, and dismantled his life piece by agonizing piece. Outside the courthouse, the afternoon sun was blindingly bright. Harlan put a heavy, reassuring hand on Darius's shoulder Is it over? Darius asked, adjusting his tie, watching the news van scramble for position for him. Yes, Harlan replied, his voice a low rumble. But for us, Darius, it is just a reminder. The system is not going to fix itself. It only works when we force it to. They turned their backs on the cameras and walked down the marble steps together, leaving the wreckage of corrupt men far behind them. In time, the heavy oak doors of the state Supreme Court swung open, but this time, it was not to signal the arrival of an angry father. It was to welcome a new generation of justice. Darius Bennett walked through the marble corridors, the sharp click of his dress shoes echoing with purpose. He was no longer the terrified boy bleeding onto the hood of a police cruiser. He had grown into a formidable, brilliant young man. He had graduated at the top of his class from Georgetown Law, fueled by a relentless burning fire that had been ignited on the cold concrete of Elm Street. The multi-million-dollar settlement he had won in the civil rights lawsuit against the city did not go to luxury cars or sprawling estates. He had quietly poured every single cent of it into establishing a nonprofit legal defense fund dedicated to investigating wrongful convictions. Darius had taken the trauma of his past and forged it into a weapon for the defenseless. During his law school tenure, he had aggressively sought out real-world mentorship, refusing to be confined to theoretical classroom debates. He spent his summers in Montgomery, Alabama, working tirelessly under the direct guidance of legendary civil rights attorney Elias Thornton at the Equal Justice Initiative. Working alongside Thornton, a man who had dedicated his life to defending the poor, the incarcerated, and the wrongly condemned, Darius learned how to dismantle corrupt systems from the inside out. He learned that the law was only as just as the people wielding it. But Darius's ultimate masterpiece of justice, the true devastating twist of karma, was a project he called the 4th District Audit. Using his new foundation's resources and partnering with the National Innocence Project, Darius led a team of paralegals and law students in a forensic teardown of every single arrest ever made by Officer Warren Kessler and Officer Blaine Tucker. If Kessler had a false bottom in his locker for Darius, he had used it on others. Darius was determined to find them. Darius spent the next 2 years digging through the archives. He found the inconsistencies. He found the fabricated probable causes. He found the men who did not have a wealthy, powerful judge for a father to swoop in and save them. He found the voiceless victims who had been bullied into accepting plea deals for crimes they never committed just to avoid the draconian sentences Kessler had threatened them with, miles away. Inside the bleak, heavily fortified walls of the federal penitentiary, Warren Kessler sat in the prison cafeteria, a shadow of the arrogant predator he used to be. His hair had thinned and turned entirely gray. His posture was permanently stooped. Every day was a master class in fear. As a former cop in a maximum security federal facility, he lived in constant paralyzing paranoia, confined to a protective custody wing where his only interactions were with other disgraced officials and violent offenders who despised him. One bleak morning, a prison guard carelessly tossed the daily newspaper onto Kessler's metal table. Kessler glanced at the front page, and the last shred of his sanity completely unraveled. Staring back at him in high-definition color was a photograph of Darius Bennett standing confidently on the courthouse steps. The headline above the photo read, "Young Attorney Dismantles Corrupt Cop's Legacy. 14 Wrongful Convictions Overturned." As Kessler read the article, his hands began to shake violently. Darius had not just put him in prison. Darius was systematically erasing his entire career. The young man was legally representing the very people Kessler had framed, using the drop gear scandal to completely invalidate decades of Kessler's police work. The city was hemorrhaging tens of millions of dollars in restitution payouts. Kessler's pension had been seized. His wife had divorced him. His friends had abandoned him. And now the teenager he had assaulted on a quiet suburban street was being hailed as a national hero for freeing the innocent men Kessler had buried. It was a psychological torment worse than any physical cage. Kessler realized with crushing finality that he would not be remembered as a tough cop. He would go down in history exclusively as the villain in Darius Bennett's origin story. He dropped his head onto the cold metal table and wept, entirely broken, surrounded by the ghost of his own hubris. Back in the city, the courtroom was packed. Darius stood behind the defense table, adjusting his tie. Beside him sat Lamar Sutton, a 30-year-old man who had spent years in state prison for a narcotics charge after Kessler had planted evidence in his vehicle during a routine traffic stop. Today was Lamar's exoneration hearing. Sitting up high on the bench, presiding over the hearing, was Chief Judge Harlan Bennett. Harlan looked down at his son. The pride swelling in his chest was indescribable. He maintained his stoic judicial composure, but a profound, silent communication passed between them. They had fought the beast together, and they had won. "Counselor Bennett," Harlan said, his resonant voice filling the quiet courtroom, "you may proceed with your motion." "Thank you, Your Honor," Darius replied, his voice steady, carrying the exact same quiet, lethal authority his father possessed. The defense moves to vacate the conviction of Lamar Sutton with prejudice, citing irrefutable, newly discovered evidence of systemic police misconduct, evidence tampering, and perjury committed by the arresting officer, Warren Kessler. Darius did not just present the facts, he told Lamar's story. He spoke of the stolen years, the shattered family, and the terrifying reality of being powerless against the badge. He spoke with the conviction of someone who had felt the cold bite of those handcuffs. Minutes later, the gavel fell with a resounding crack. Motion granted. Judge Bennett declared, "Mr. Sutton, you are a free man. This court deeply apologizes for the profound failure of justice you have endured." Tears streamed down Lamar's face as he pulled Darius into a bone-crushing hug. The gallery erupted in applause. Darius hugged him back, looking over Lamar's shoulder directly at his father. Harlan gave a slow, respectful nod. The story of the arrogant officers who thought they could detain a black kid for walking in the wrong neighborhood did not end in tragedy. It ended in a revolution. They thought they were stopping a prowler. Instead, they accidentally forged the greatest civil rights attorney their city had ever seen. The badges lost, the robes won, and justice, though blind, proved it still carried a remarkably heavy sword. What an absolutely incredible journey of power, karma, and ultimate redemption. If Darius's story of turning deep trauma into a life-saving mission for justice gave you goosebumps, you need to be part of our community. Cases like this happen in the shadows every single day, and it is up to us to shine a massive spotlight on them. We bring you the most intense, jaw-dropping stories of real-life karma, legal battles, and the triumph of the human spirit. Do not let this story stop here. Hit that like button right now to show your support for those fighting against corruption. Share this video with your friends, family, and anyone who needs a powerful reminder that justice always strikes back. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell so you never miss out on our next thrilling story. Stand with us. Spread the word.